So far has just explored the price elasticity of demand, and that's because we start with that because that's the easiest of these concepts to really get under our belts because we're comfortable being consumers. We've all been consumers, and it's the most kind of easiest intuitive approach to this to begin with. In this little piece, I'm going to explore some other useful ways to apply this idea of elasticity, and I start with the price elasticity of supply. I mentioned accidentally along the way that what we've said about demand, we could also be saying about supply, and it really isn't that wildly different. So I've drawn the four curves here, just like we did for demand. Um, Here I have the inelastic supply curve just above the perfectly inelastic supply curve. So I'll go ahead and label those now that I'm recording this, and I'm going to fudge something for you. This one's perfectly inelastic down here. It's supposed to be vertical. It looks like maybe I've come a little bit positive, but I wanted it to be vertical. See how it looks like my fudged eye right there? That's perfectly inelastic. So what that would be telling us is that this is how much the market can sell no matter what the price. And an example that's sometimes used for that is land because they're not making any more of it. So how much can be sold? Well, in the long run, no matter what the price, there's only so much of it. And that's not even a great example because, as I understand it, there are places like Abu Dhabi, which is man-made land, and so real estate is something that at higher prices, the quantities sold can rise. So even that classic example is not that firm. So these extremes of perfectly elastic and inelastic are just that. They're extremes. But by being familiar with those, that helps us to say, well, things like those that aren't extreme are simply inelastic. And let's think about what this supply curve is telling us here. As the price that sellers can get goes way up, they're only willing and able to sell a little bit more. Or doom and gloom is easier to understand or get a feel for. If the price that they can get falls a lot, I was using purple before, let me continue to use purple. If the price that they can get falls a lot, the amount that they're willing and able to sell doesn't change all that much, right? Watch. There's the price fall. At the higher price, they were willing and able to sell this much, here. Then the price fell all the way to here. Huge fall in price, and the quantity only fell this much. So what could we figure is true with these sellers? If the price they could get fell a lot and what they sold only fell a little, that must mean that they really need to sell this, right? Or there's something about it, thinking if we want to think about it as a price rise, they only raise what they can sell by a little. It must be something that's really hard to get, perhaps get out of the ground or something like that. Even at high prices, they can't change what they're doing very much. And this purple image here, even at low prices, they're still selling about the same amount. To me, that feels like they really need to sell it. Remember, you and I are the sellers of labor. I just changed this Q to an L, and I changed that P to a W, and I have the supply curve for labor. And particularly some groups, some working groups, might really need to work, and they would have very inelastic supply curves, which is, I think, is very interesting to think about in terms of policy and taxes and things like that, how different groups might have different elasticities of the supply curves of labor. I think it's just fun to think about. Hopefully that helps clarify what that is. Over here, I have a perfectly elastic supply curve. I even looked online before I did this, and there are really no good examples of a perfectly elastic supply curve. It's just some theoretical thing. that doesn't really, truly exist, but it is useful for thinking about the E. Perfectly elastic. What it would mean is that if the sellers could get this price, they could or would provide an infinite amount of the good at that price. There's just nothing out there that I can find that is a good example of something like that, but it would have to be something that the inputs to it wouldn't get bid up in price, and they could just supply all that the consumers would be willing to purchase at that price. And I'm guessing it would, if you could think of something, it would have to be something abstract, maybe somehow along the lines of like a natural resource or something that could be easily, if someone could sell it, if they could have it and own it, they could easily get more and sell more of it. It's pretty abstract. I don't know of anything. But things like this are elastic, and these are things for which the sellers are very responsive to price. If these sellers can get a little bit more money, they'll sell a whole lot more. So a little price rise leads to a big response. Big response and output for a little price rise. So this is something that's very easy for people to start selling. For some people, that could be labor, people who could work or not work. Give me a little bit more money. Yeah, sure, I'll go to work. Take away that money. I'm out. I'm done. I don't need to sell this. Something like that. And of course, that would be an L and a W if we're talking about the labor market. This is something that the input costs don't get bid up too well. Maybe it would be selling our used stuff during a depression, right? Our opportunity cost is low. A lot of people are laid off and not working. If we could get a little bit more for our stuff, we might start selling our stuff a lot. Maybe that would be something that would be a real life example. Would have to be those low opportunity costs, though, I think, for that to make sense. So, oh, by the way, let me put that up again. If you can remember, this looks like an E and this looks like an I, then what I changed up here is still true, right? Small change here, big change there. For this to be elastic, it's greater than 1. Big number over small number, always greater than 1. And I realize this is in quantities. These values are not percent change, but at these extremes that I have, it's still always going to be big number, small number, and help us memorize what goes with what the formula means, or what the formula is given the image that we have. It can help us get there. Now, there are other things in the textbook, other types of elasticities that we can look at. Again, we start with the price elasticity of demand just because it's the most comfortable, and then I've moved on to this price elasticity of supply because it's the second most comfortable, but there are other things that are very interesting to consider, and our formula really works the same way. The core element is this term elasticity and this meaning of responsiveness. So if you are good with the fact that we're using the word elasticity to describe how responsive people are, the rest you could really, honestly, you could just figure out if you really work at it and know that that's the meaning of the word elasticity is responsiveness. So the first thing that the textbook's going to take us through is, I believe the first one is the cross-price elasticity of demand.